Bone Tomahawk shows us what would happen if, instead of gun duels in the Old West, there were cannibals ripping people in half. It looks like a slow burn western until it caves your skull in with some of the most brutal horror ever put on film. As S. Craig Zahler's directorial debut, Bone Tomahawk quietly crept onto the indie scene in 2015 and left a bloodstain on the minds of everyone who saw it. But what does the ending actually mean? Who were those troglodytes? And what happened to the troglodyte women? Today, we're slicing open the ending of Bone Tomahawk, digging into the movie's raw underbelly and exploring the theories buried beneath the dirt. So here's what you need to know. After a gang of idiot thieves stumbles upon sacred ground, most of them get slaughtered, but a few escape to the small town of Bright Hope, and the nasty cave people follow them there. These mysterious, cave-dwelling cannibals kidnap 3 townsfolk, a woman who looks way too good to hang around a group of sweaty cowboys named Samantha, a deputy, and a very unlucky stable boy who shows us what happens when gymnasts try to do a split without stretching. Kurt Russell, his way too old backup deputy, a gunslinger who keeps screwing other guys' wives, and Samantha's incredibly lucky husband Arthur, who's limping around on a broken leg, set out to rescue them. They track the tribe to a hidden cave system in the desert. They already left Arthur behind because he was slowing them down. The gunslinger took an arrow, and then the sheriff and his backup deputy get captured. That's when the real nightmare begins. For the finale, the troglodytes drag the sheriff and his backup deputy into their cave. Samantha is still alive and begs them to do whatever the creeps command. She warns them that the deputy isn't doing well, and that the other guy who was taken became lunch. One of the beasts screams to call the others. Then they pull the sick deputy out of his cage, strip him naked, and scalp him. They hammer a spike into his mouth, hang him upside down, and rip him into 2 pieces. While they await their fate, the sheriff tries to figure out if there's anything they can do to save themselves. He asks Samantha for all the information she might have. She tells him that, so far, she's counted 12 males and 2 pregnant females who are severely crippled. He devises a plan to poison them with opium. Meanwhile, Arthur finally wakes up from his blood loss-induced fever dream and decides to limp towards certain death in the cannibal cave. After an entire day of stumbling, he finally hears the screams of the troglodytes. Back in the cave, the sheriff sets his plan in motion. He pretends to drink from his flask, hoping the troglodytes will steal it, and sure enough, they do. One of the beasts takes a big chug of opium, and so does his buddy. Then they wander off. Judging by how much they drank, Samantha tells the sheriff that one of them will die, and the other is about to take a really long nap. Outside, 2 troglodytes stumble upon Arthur, but he manages to shoot and kill them. He examines one of the bodies and finds something lodged in its neck. He cuts it out. It's a whistle made of bone. Arthur stumbles and crawls his way toward the cave and blows on the whistle. It lets out a hideous scream, which instantly draws one of the troglodytes. Arthur shoots him too. Back in the cave, the leader of those ashy-looking bastards is furious that some of his buddies got killed. They pull the sheriff from his cage, cut a hole in his stomach, and shove in a red-hot piece of metal. There's a scream from outside, so one of them leaves to check it out. Meanwhile, the leader fumbles around trying to figure out how a gun works, intent on blasting the sheriff's family jewels off. Gunshots are closing in, but it's too late. The boss figured out how the gun works and shoots the sheriff. Knowing he doesn't have long, the sheriff uses what little energy he has left to cut off the troglodyte's foot. That's when Arthur crawls in and shoots the beast. The sheriff crawls on top of the body and finishes the job by cutting off its head. As the sheriff collapses, Arthur takes a moment to suck some face with his wife. The sheriff tells his backup deputy to take the lovers home. He'll stay behind because there are still 3 troglodytes left, and they know where the town is. They leave the sheriff behind, rifle in hand, as they make their way toward the exit of the cave. On their way out, they pass the troglodyte women. They're pregnant, but all their limbs have been removed. Their only purpose is breeding. It looks like they are suffering, and they are planning to kill off all the men, so I will never really understand why they leave the women there to starve to death. As the 3 of them walk away, they hear 3 gunshots echo behind them. Did the sheriff kill the troglodytes? Or himself? That's something the director never told us. But the backup deputy has nothing but faith in his boss, and his belief that the sheriff finished the job is what makes us believe too. Bone Tomahawk doesn't give you closure. It gives you 3 gunshots echoing through a dead canyon, and the image of 3 survivors walking into the sunrise, not victorious, just alive. One is traumatized because of what she saw. One limps and was actually kind of a badass for saving his wife with a broken leg, and the last clutches a stone in his hand like it's the only solid thing left in the world after he took a peek of what's behind the curtain. There's no dramatic music, just silence and dust, because this isn't a story about killing monsters. It's about the men who face monsters alone, knowing no one will ever know they were there. The sheriff doesn't survive, not because he couldn't, but because someone had to stay behind. Someone had to do the dirty work to make sure the last horror didn't crawl out of that cave and hurt the ones he loves. And he accepts that fate without complaint. No applause, no reward. That's the tragedy, but also the beauty. He's the kind of man who disappears into the myth, a husband turned martyr, buried in the dark so that others can see daylight. In another kind of western, he would have ridden home on horseback to cheers and banners. But this isn't that story. This is a story about quiet heroism, about the people who bleed so others don't have to, and about the brutal truth that sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything. Bone Tomahawk never gives a straight answer about the Troglodytes, and that's the point. They aren't named. They have no language, no origin, no explanation. Even the one Native American character in the film, known only as the professor, refuses to call them human. He says they're not part of any tribe, not part of any people, just monsters that even other indigenous groups fear and avoid. On the surface, you might think they're a prehistoric offshoot, an isolated branch of early man left to rot and evolve in the dark, a grounded version of the Time Machine's Morlocks. But that only scratches the surface, because the Troglodytes are more than just horror villains. They are violence made flesh. They are the nightmares buried beneath the myth of the American frontier, and they represent the darkest, bloodiest fears white settlers once projected onto native tribes. In fact, Bone Tomahawk flips the old cowboys versus Indians trope on its head, but not in the way you might expect. The Troglodytes are so monstrous, so grotesque, that they become a twisted exaggeration of the racist caricatures found in early westerns. The film dodges direct criticism by saying they're not actually native, but the imagery still lingers. They're presented as beyond redemption, so far from human that their total eradication is not only acceptable, but morally justified. Some critics argue that this plays directly into the idea that wiping out the savage other is both heroic and necessary, where most stories show settlers inflicting unspeakable horrors on indigenous people. Bone Tomahawk reverses it, giving us monsters so cruel that our violence becomes righteous. And that's the real horror. Not just the gore, not the cannibalism, but the uncomfortable idea that we're watching a violent fantasy, one where extermination feels like justice. The Troglodytes aren't just movie monsters. They're what we've buried historically, culturally, and morally. Bone Tomahawk doesn't hold your hand. It drags you across the dirt, makes you smell the rot, and leaves you limping. But that's what makes it so powerful. It's not just a horror film. It's a Western eulogy for a mythic past, interrupted by something ancient and unspeakable. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more film deep dives, and let me know in the comments, was there something I missed? Thanks for watching.